Ary Rosenbaum here with another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. This week's topic, we're going to talk about why small 401k plans need a big plan thinking. Of course, first things first, go to that401ksite.com, sign up, National Virtual Conference, just a matter of a couple weeks away. Sign up, it's free. Thursday and Friday, I think we're going to start it from noon to about 3 p.m. We'll see if we have to extend it. And some great topics. We'll start at noon because we got the West Coast people. We don't want to start at like 6 a.m. If you can't make it, it's going to be available forever on YouTube. And of course, Chicago and Denver coming up in a couple months, as well as eventually Washington, D.C. So please sign up at that401ksite.com. That 401k Plan Provider Handbook, as well as the other books, Full Circle and whatnot, are available on Kindle and paperback. It just came out. I bought a copy, not to help the sales, just so I could have it on my Kindle at all times. Really, finally, writing a book primarily on the business, just, from experiences and whatnot, from building a practice from nothing. And some of the things that I saw over time, some of the mistakes that I saw that I made, as well as mistakes that other people had made. I was just looking through it today. Marketing aspects, dealing with employees, all that kind of stuff, because, my running joke, I was, the reason I don't have employees is I was employed once too, and the issues that come with that. So let's get to the topic at hand. A couple months ago and all that stuff, I had a blog post called The $3 Million Myth, and a good buddy, friend of the show, just wrote me back and said, I just love this blog post. It's one of your best, and this is a good friend of mine for the last, 20 years. And there are certain articles that, over the years will say, wow, this is excellent and whatnot. So I took the blog post, wrote an entire article based on that. And I'm a big fan of myths. You were told some stuff when you were a kid. If you pee in the pool, there's going to be a thing following you. If you crack your knuckles, you'll get arthritis. Eat your vegetables, you're never going to grow. I mean, I heard that stuff about fruit. And I'm 53, luckily in the best of health, and I don't eat fruit. I like strawberries, grapes, avocados, and tomatoes, and that's it. And of course, avocados and tomatoes are fruit, but we don't consider them fruit. But outside of that, I don't like fruit. But we were always told certain things that were just not really true, and yeah, you can't, a cloud isn't going to follow you if you pee in the pool, but, pool hygiene certainly matters. So the myths are based on, following some good behavior. And I don't crack my knuckles anymore ever since then, but I don't like the sound of it. But in the retirement plan space, we always have the myths that, plan sponsors tell themselves. And, I think we were always told something about not swallowing gum and, it's going to take 7 years to digest or some other nonsense. A lot of small plan sponsors have ultimately convinced themselves of a myth that is so persistent that it's, rite of passage in the retirement plan world. It's, my plan is small. Nobody's really going to care about me. We only have $3 million in assets. No ERISA litigator is ever going to come down on us. We're too small to get sued. And, I always tell the story. Years ago, I was on LinkedIn, back when the groups were really happening. I got a lot of traction there. When I started my practice in 2010, it really started off very slowly. And it was Mike Alford who, I went to see him at Battery Park City. And he said, he was one of the founders of Brightspace and eventually sold off the company and is the big Bitcoin guy. And he told me, the way they got traction was to participate in the groups. And I took his advice and I participated in the LinkedIn groups, met guys like James Holland, and James Holland and I were dealing with some guy. His name was Elmer. I'm not going to give you his last name, but he wasn't even somebody in the 401k plan space. I think he was somebody who was recruiting people for brokerage houses, and he said that we were selling fear. No 401k plans are ever going to get sued. This is nonsense. And you know, the problem is that ERISA never came in with a size exemption. It doesn't say under ERISA we're not going to be concerned with plans that are under less than $3 million. You're covered under ERISA. You're covered under ERISA. You have the same fiduciary obligations whether you have $3 million in assets or $300 million in assets. Small plans are vulnerable because they often operate informally, as opposed to IBM's 401k plan. $3 million myth isn't just wrong; it's costly. Small doesn't really mean safe. A 401k plan is a trust. It's a legal separate entity. It's regulated with fiduciary duties attached to every decision, written or unwritten. Whether the plan covers 10 people or 10,000, the obligation remains the same. You got to act prudently, pay reasonable fees, monitor investments, document decisions, deposit deferrals timely, and follow the plan document. You don't get a freebie because you're a small plan. It doesn't get waived, and it doesn't disappear, at all. So the uncomfortable reality is that small plans make the most mistakes. They make the most mistakes: late deposits, inconsistent eligibility, sloppy hardship reviews, no investment monitoring, vague or non-existent minutes, outdated plan documents, and service providers selected on gut feeling or relationship instead of due diligence. And that's the nature of it. Informal is great, except that when it's not great, when decisions aren't documented and whatnot, there are real costs of a small plan mistake. When we were kids, we were told nonsense. If you pick a scab, your arm's going to fall off or stuff like that. I still, to this day, have a nervous habit of biting my nails. And I think I remember my aunt telling me, well, if you continue doing that, you're going to have infections and you're going to end up surgery on your fingers and all this stuff. And none of it was true. In the 401k plan space, the consequences aren't truly exaggerated. They're real. Late deposits are going to become PTs. High fees become lost savings for participants. Poorly monitored investments become years of underperformance. Lack of documentation becomes a nightmare when auditors ask, can you show us? Plan document failures result in expensive corrections and penalties. A $3 million plan with 10 employees probably has costly errors as a $30 million plan with hundreds of employees. But, that cost is burdensome for a small employer. Small plans, the problem is they have less structure, less oversight, and less formal governance. And you got to treat your plan like a big one. And I'm not talking that you got to hire the biggest name consultants out there. You have to build certain things. It's all about processes. You need to build some actual governance. Too many plans suffer from what I call shoe box compliance, which is a folder full of outdated forms, unsigned agreements, old fee disclosures, and no real structure. It's important to create, bylaws, a semi-annual or annual method of reviewing the plan, clear roles for fiduciaries and service providers, minutes from every meeting, even short ones, and a checklist for deposits, loans, notices, and investments. A small plan without governance is like a kid convinced that knuckle cracking leads to arthritis, acting on a belief instead of actual facts. And it's important to monitor fees like it actually matters. The nature of the business, I've always said for the last 16 years, is it's all predicated on plan assets. The more assets you have, the less fees percentage you'll pay, the better idea, better service, better website, all this kind of stuff. And the fact is that small plans pay disproportionately high fees because they're, no one's really benchmarking them. Fees don't become reasonable simply because the plan is small. They become reasonable when you prove that they are by benchmarking against other providers. And the question is to plan sponsors, when was the last time you've actually benchmarked your fees? Share classes, that was the big killer back in the day after the Wolf case. the ABG Fidelity case. That was a wake-up call to the industry. Are you still using revenue sharing? People got upset. James Holland will attest to this. Other people will attest to it. 16 years ago, I called revenue sharing payola. And the idea of payola, how is that different? And payola was the concept that radio DJs were getting money from record companies to play certain music. And there was a crackdown on it, and there was a federal law that was passed to ban it. Revenue sharing is payola. This was, in my opinion, some funds paid it, some don't. It was for shelf space, as they said. Use our funds, we're going to kick some money back to you. But really, it was a shell game because the funds that had charged revenue sharing, that provided revenue sharing, were more costly than the index funds that couldn't afford to do that. When you got, ETFs or index funds that are 6 to 8 basis points, how are they going to pay rev share? It economically couldn't work. So when I started in this business, I was told that, I was a big index guy, and I was told that index funds were more expensive to run than an actively managed funds because the nature of rev share and the kickbacks and whatnot. But, it's important for plan sponsors to identify all their costs. And thanks to fee disclosure now since 2012, plan sponsors could know the direct and indirect costs for their plans. It's important for plan sponsors to review their investments, even if they use target date funds. I talked about that Fakakta law firm. 10 years, they didn't review funds. Now, that wasn't a $3 million plan. That was like a $25 million plan. They didn't do their job until I woke them up. And, of course, they hired the advisor that I didn't recommend. But that's life and whatnot. Small plans that don't monitor investments are the adult equivalents of believing that swallowing watermelon seeds makes one grow melons in their stomach. That's just, I never heard of that Baba Mainza, which is a Yiddish word for, like, BS story. But, that is, something that, we were told, okay, they don't have to review their investments. And that's complete and utter nonsense. It's important that plan sponsors document everything. ERISA is all about having a process and then following it. If you made a prudent decision but didn't write it down, it may as well have never happened. The IRS, you don't have an amended plan document, you never did it. Documentation protects you from lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, participant complaints, vendor disputes, and failing to recall decisions made years later. Your fiduciary file should include minutes, fee reviews, investment reports, service agreements, provider evaluations, and evidence of disclosure sent to participants. In other words, proof that you behave like a responsible adult, not a child who swears someone else made the mess. Small plans have more risk, in my opinion, because the smaller the plan, the more likely it is to have operational errors, missing or incomplete paperwork, inconsistent contributions, incorrect eligibility tracking, outdated plan amendments, improper loan or hardship approvals, and fiduciaries who don't know they are fiduciaries. Large plans have committees, consultants, auditors, and processes. Small plans have assumptions. And, they always say about assuming you're going to make an ass out of you and me. Assumptions are where trouble lies. Just like childhood myths, these beliefs feel comforting, but comfort is not compliance. Here's the action plan for small plan fiduciaries. Create a formal government structure, even if it's a one-person committee. Structure it. I don't recommend one-person committees. It always reminds me of the paralegal Marge, who said, keep all the evidence of what you're doing up to date in case you get hit by a bus. Benchmark your fees every year, not once a decade, annually for these small plans. Review investments quarterly. Simple lineups still require real oversight, and that includes index funds and target date funds. Keep a fiduciary file, minutes, decisions, disclosures, reviews, all of it. Confirm operational compliance, deferrals, eligibility, loans, hardships, notices. It's important, which plan sponsors really don't do, evaluate service providers. Don't stick with a vendor because you've always used them. Update your plan document. Make sure operations match the text, not memories. Too often we see the mistakes of, something like the definition of compensation, not meeting the terms of the plan document. Act as if you're going to be audited tomorrow, because you might be by the government. Everybody talks about, the ERISA litigator. I, work in the medium, small plan size space. I'm more concerned over, the IRS and the DOL. The myths of childhood were, charming. The myths of 401k plan spending are not charming. A $3 million plan isn't some sort of toy. It isn't protected by size. It isn't immune from audits, complaints, or consequences. It's a real trust with real fiduciaries who carry real responsibilities. Just like other childhood warnings that help shape our habits, this one should stick with you. Small plans don't get a free pass. Small plans need big plan discipline. If anything, small plans need more discipline because they have fewer resources and less room for error. You don't need to scare your inner child. You just need to stop believing the myth and start acting like the fiduciary you already are. So that's how I see it. And that's why I continue to insist that small plans are the biggest messes. That's just from the nature of the practice and just the nature of the business. They don't get the service that larger plans do or the competition. That's just the nature of things. And, when you work with an employer that the boss's spouse is the HR director, it's a little bit different than a multinational corporation where you have a HR staff that is really, got a benefits resource specialist on staff. So anyway, that concludes this episode of that 401k podcast. Always getting in under 20 minutes, as long as I try. Sometimes I go a little bit over. That's fine. But go to that 401ksite.com. Sign up for all our events, National Virtual Conference in a couple of weeks, and that 401k Plan Provider Handbook available, Kindle, paperback, as well as the other books as well. Full Circle actually sold 2 copies this month. Woohoo! I just made $6. And the Plan Provider Handbook is selling okay. I'm never going to be happy. I'd love to sell 1,000 copies. I don't know how realistic that is, but whatever. So tune in next week for another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Take care. Bye.